Finding inspiration for your projects can come from the strangest places. Building on those ideas and implementing it into a game that you want to play is the building block of any great work. This week, join me, Zach Walsh, as I talk with Matt about his game, They Stirred. We go over influences, the importance of playtesting, and how to take a system you enjoy and make it your own. Welcome to Schedule for Launch, a podcast to discover projects that you may have missed. So I'm super excited to be doing this introduction for the third time because I've forgot to hit record twice now, basically. Matt, thank you so much for coming onto the show and talking about They Stirred with me.
Hey, I'm really happy to be here. I'm really happy I'm really happy to talk about the project because I can't believe how successful we were on Kickstarter. I was up until when I pushed the go button and started getting pledges, I figured I wasn't going to get any at all. That last stretch goal on the campaign, I was just like, yeah, this is a joke for my friends and I'll laugh about later, and we hit it. So I mean, that's unbelievable to me. I'm really happy and really excited about it.
It was so much fun to watch that Kickstarter go through too. And my favorite thing actually was during it and right after, the messages you were sending out. Oh, there was such a level of excitement, and I love seeing it so much.
Oh man, yeah, I couldn't stop talking. I couldn't stop talking about the Kickstarter during the whole campaign. Eventually, my wife was like, "You need to shut up about this." She's very supportive of the whole thing. I just want to be clear, but I think I got on her nerves towards the end there because I was just like, "Oh, I don't know if I can do crowdfunding again." It was not good for my mental health. I'll tell you that much.
Well, before we get too far in there, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So let's see. I like to think, this is not my job anymore, but I like to think of myself as a software engineer, although I actually manage a team of software engineers now. I've been playing role-playing games since I was, I think I was I had just gotten out of Cub Scouts, I just joined my Boy Scout troop, I was hanging out with some kids from my patrol, and they were like, "Hey, have you ever played D&D?" And I was like, "No, but I love Lord of the Rings. Let's talk about this." And we played a game, and it was fantastic. And I got so sucked into that whole thing. I ended up, I don't know, I have a shelf in this room with every second edition D&D book pretty much ever published. I got so sucked into that, D&D. I loved D&D. I played a lot of Star Wars D6 back in the day. I don't know if you ever played that one. It was fantastic, though.
I've heard about it.
Oh, it's an old guy game, but it was pretty good back in the day, because it was from the only Star Wars movies that were out at the time were the first three, and all the amazing fan books and stuff like that came out in that era, and they were just great. I don't know. We had a different adventure every week, basically, with all with my buddies, and hanging out in my friend's basement, just playing role-playing games and trying to write our own and not being very good at it. We were in junior high at the time, right?
Yeah.
That was 95. Role-playing games have actually come. It's amazing to me how much better all role-playing games in general are. Second edition D&D, it was great at the time. I loved it so much, but it was kind of a mess when you look at it now, and you're like, wait, you look if you look at the different abilities related to charisma, for example, it's everything is different. There's if you have a 16, you have you can have 5 henchmen, and you have a +3 reaction bonus, and nothing's related to anything. So it's been really exciting to me to watch all of the new things coming out now, because they're all so well put together and well designed, and all of the pieces go together really well. One that I'm really impressed with lately is Blades in the Dark. It's an incredible system. It's really well thought out. There's so much in there in that book. It's really great.
It's arguably my favorite.
people would have been like screaming and throwing themselves against the wall and stuff like just reacting insanely back in the day, to see something like that well put together. I don't know. It's just like a crazy time because like the indie community is so active and they come up with so many great things.
Yeah.
It's just amazing, and I'm really excited to be part of that now because I've been playing role-playing games for like 25-ish years now, and well, more than that really, and it's really exciting to be able to like, I grew up playing it. I have gosh, my daughter's I recently played the My Little Pony game with my daughter. I mean, it's
that one's really good actually.
It is surprisingly well put together for a game based on a children's show. I will say that much.
We had one of the writers come onto the show actually when they released their game.
I gotta say, I really enjoyed it. I think she did too. It was a lot of fun. I got to bust out some of my. I've watched a lot of it with her, so I can do some of the voices passably. So she was real excited about that. But yeah, so it was really exciting to be able to, to be able to put together like my own thing and be like, because I don't know, we'd been watching. I was watching a lot of cartoons with her at the time, and I don't know why, but somehow we got on this like let's watch post-apocalyptic kids shows kind of kick. And it's a surprisingly entertaining and good genre on Netflix. Mm-hmm. There's Kipo and the Age of the Wonder Beasts is astonishingly good if you haven't seen it. There's the one that really got me going on this idea though was called The Last Kids on Earth, and it's about like 4 kids in a post-apocalyptic zombie apocalypse more or less, but there's also monsters and trans-dimensional Cthulhu-ish monsters and stuff like that all mixed together, and it's kind of funny but it's kind of serious. And I was like, as we were watching this, I'm like, man, I would like to tell stories in this universe, and it'd be really fun to like get a bunch of people together and like make a story like this. And so I was like, wow, that'd be really fun. And then I'm like, well, I remember that All Flesh Must Be Eaten was really popular back in the day. Maybe that'd be a good choice. And I looked at it and I'm like, it was really popular back in the day, but I don't think it's been updated in like 15 or 20 years, right? Like, it shows its age, right? Like, I wouldn't run a game in D&D 2nd edition. I wouldn't run like a game of Werewolf 1st edition. I wouldn't run that either.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, that's lame. What else is there out there? I'm like, well, I love Dungeon World. Maybe Apocalypse World's worth a shot. And I went and I looked at that, and I'm like, man, there's a lot of stuff in this setting that I want to take out. And like, all of those like Powered by the Apocalypse games, like it's designed to work a specific way. The in a lot of ways the fiction is baked into the rule set.
Yeah.
And like that's a really strong selling point of the game, but also it means if you want to like mod it, it's really hard. It's not like D&D where you just throw some different monsters on the table and all of a sudden it's a different kind of story, kind of, So it's like, wow. But I do love that system because, it's got that really neat 7s, 2d6 plus or, -1 up to like +2. It's got a really nicely centered kind of probability curve. I like the idea of partial successes, like a partial success being really easy to get, but like actually achieving your goal with no drawbacks being hard. I was like, I think that's a great system, but one thing that I've always run into with Powered by the Apocalypse is like, either you have like, because they're always like, oh, the players should never like try to like trigger a move necessarily, and like don't use the name of the move when you discuss the outcome of an event and stuff like that. And I'm like, that works great if everybody at the table knows how the game works, I feel like. But like, yeah. I'm pretty heavily involved in adventures, in D&D Adventures League, and like my greatest joy over there is just interacting with people who've never played the game before. Like, not recently, obviously, but like when I was playing at the store, like every week, there'd be like a kid who'd come in and had played like once or twice with his mom because he's like 8, and like she doesn't really want to play, but she's gonna play because she's interested in what her kid does, and like getting both of them to have the same level of enjoyment out of a game, and seeing her, both of them have fun, not just because they're there with each other, but like actually because they're interested in the game. It's a really great feeling. I love introducing new people to role playing as a hobby because, man, it's my favorite hobby. I spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about it, and so I wanted a game that was is easy to play, but also I wanted a game where, because like if you run a game every week, there's days where you show up and you're like, man, I really don't want to run this game today, but I said I was going to do it, and I'm not going to say no because like, people showed up and they're excited. So I wanted a game that was easy to DM too. And like D&D sometimes works for that, and other games work really well for that, but like I feel like the Powered by Apocalypse kind of games, like where like the players have a lot of agency and they kind of like drive the game quite a bit. Those are really great for that because as the DM, you can eventually, or as the GM in those games, like the players like, I want to try this thing out, and then like really all the GM is doing is applying consequences to their actions, and the story kind of drives itself. So I wanted something kind of like that worked kind of like Powered by the Apocalypse, but was a little easier to run. A lot of the moves in that game, in a lot of the Powered by the Apocalypse games, are kind of complicated to resolve.
Yeah, they can be, that's for sure.
And there's a lot of them often, so I'm like, that's kind of a drawback too. So it's kind of like, well, what's something I can kind of do in the middle of all of that? And so I think the other thing that also kind of is difficult with those sometimes is because the players have such a high level of agency in those games, making it work in the horror kind of like, even the campy horror genre, it's hard because like the players have such a broad spectrum. Like when I'm going to use, like, for example, like in Dungeon World, like when what is it, Fiercely Assault? Is that how or I don't remember exactly what the
Hack and Slash, maybe?
Hack and Slash, thank you. I was thinking Fiercely Assault because that's Legacy. If you don't get that 10, like you have a lot of choice about what goes wrong, and like I feel like that doesn't fit like with like the horror, like the campy kind of zombie movie genre almost, right? Like like something's gonna go wrong, but if you have too much control over it, like it's not like surprising how it goes wrong. So it's kind of like, well, I want something kind of in the middle, something where I'm giving them those options, but also like letting the player pick how it goes wrong, but I want to give them a constrained set of options. And that was kind of how I set up the rule system for They Stirred. I kind of tried to distill everything down to about I think there's 9 moves total in the game, and it plays sort of like Powered by the Apocalypse. It's familiar to that. Actually, if you're a big fan of Powered by the Apocalypse, you'll probably say I did it wrong, or abused the way the system was designed, and I can't argue with that because it's true. But I also like the way the way it worked after I was done with it. When I got it done, I'm like, you know what? It's a different experience and it plays differently, but like it feels like you're in the movie, and it's really easy to run too. So as an example, I gave it to a group to do that wanted to run their own run a game on a podcast, and the organizer gave the quick start rule set to the games master, and games master got sick, lost his voice, couldn't come on that day. So the lady who was the community organizer for this show was like, well, with like half an hour notice too, was like, oh well, I guess I'm gonna run it then. And like 30 minutes into the rules, she came on. I watched the whole thing. I'm not gonna lie. At pretty much every call she made, she did the exact sort of thing I would have done too. So I was like, wow, this is great. Somebody spent like 30 minutes with the rules and was able to like basically run it the exact way I would have run it, which I felt means I got my goal of like it's easy to run too, which was really what I wanted.
I watched that too, and it was great.
Wasn't it?
It was so good. She only had 30 minutes prep?
Yeah, she had 30 minutes of prep on that show. It was unbelievable. Like I can't imagine how I can't imagine how good it would have been if she had actually time to prep, because it was amazing and she didn't. But one of the key mechanics here that I think really makes it feel like that was well illustrated in that, but makes you feel like you're really in a zombie movie is that trouble score.
I have a question about that in a little bit.
Yeah, it's a really simple mechanic that's kind of, I don't even remember, it's kind of a ripoff of a thing I saw on the Angry GM. He has a similar thing that he talks about in one of his many 10,000 word rants, profanity laced rants. But I used an idea similar to it in D&D, and I was like, I like what he did, but I think it's too complicated. It's simple, but it was too complicated to run at the table. You basically collect a bunch of D6s, and whenever the players did something that that wastes time or would make a lot of noise, you roll the D6s. And if any of them's a 1, then there's a random encounter. I liked that idea where and as time passes, you add more D6s to the pool, and when there's a random encounter, you take them out. It's a good mechanic. It works well, but I was like, it's kind of fiddly, and the players have to be like, I don't know, there's a pile of D6s, I don't know, I was running a game, and I think I got up to 76 before I rolled a 1. And at that point, when you're adding another D6 to a pile, people are losing track of it. They're like, there's a bunch of D6, whatever. It's a little worse now, I guess. I wanted the trouble score to just be a simple numerical value that was here's how bad things are going to, here's how long it's been since something really bad happened, and get ready for that. Because I feel that's, it's like in Jaws where you don't really see the shark and they hint that the shark's there for so long, and by the time you actually see the shark, you're just all freaked out. It's that kind of mechanic is the idea. You see it going up, you know it's going to happen, you don't know when it's going to happen, and then when it does, something bad happens, and it works really well for getting people kind of on edge.
Yeah, it builds up a tension.
Yeah, it does that, and it works pretty well. And she started at 10 with it, which was way higher than I had ever imagined starting it at. And I was like, wait a minute, why didn't I ever do that? That worked way better than what I would have done. Because it gave the story kind of a kick in the butt, basically right at the beginning, right? Because something went wildly wrong, because I think it was at 10, and the guy rolled or it was 8 or something, but basically the first roll of the session was a 3, and so he rolled under the trouble score. So trouble happens, and I think a bunch of raiders showed up, or potentially raiders showed up, and they didn't know what was happening at that point. But kind of the theme of the game is generally that the zombies are only really a backdrop that exposes some of the ways that some of the bad ways that people will behave with each other during a disaster. When I saw that, I absolutely went back into the quick start guide, which was, they got an early draft of it. I went back in there and I'm I had to go through and kind of edit it and make sure it worked. But then I was I think starting a trouble score of 6 is probably quite reasonable, because it gets your story going faster.
Exactly. Yeah. So we've been talking a little bit here, but what exactly is They Stirred? What's the setting of that? We haven't touched on that yet. Oh, goodness
gracious, you're right. I haven't really said. Yeah. So They Stirred is it's kind of inspired by a lot of old school zombie movies, really. That's definitely in its DNA. Kind of the jump scare zombie movies of, say, the 80s and 90s, right? I don't know, 28 Days Later, anything all between that and anything from George Romero, right? Anything in between there. And the idea is that, it's not in a lot of those movies, it's the first night where there's undead, right? And that's an interesting story, but it doesn't work well as a campaign particularly, right? Unless you're doing some kind of I just feel that it wouldn't work well as a campaign, and I really wanted to run a campaign of this. So I was like, well, you know what? Let's just say it's been a while since the zombie apocalypse happened. And it's kind of more of a Walking Dead kind of era, right? To be honest, the real inspiration here was Z Nation, which is which is like,
Yeah.
I mean, like I was gonna say, it's like if the Sharknado producers made The Walking Dead, but so yeah, so that's kind of the goal there, was to make a game that fit into that genre, because like I like a little bit of goofy with my horror. I think the highs and the lows makes the scary parts better. If it's not always scary, it's when it is scary, it's much scarier, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like I don't know, like in shows I like Firefly, where they're like, it'll start out serious and then it'll be funny at the end, or it'll start out funny and be serious at the end. Like I like that kind of storytelling, and that's kind of what I try to do. So that's the idea, is to kind of bake all of those things together and make a game that lets you run a set of sessions that are kind of like that in a universe kind of like that. And it's just regular guys out. I mean, pretty regular. They do get a little more powerful, as we discovered once you start leveling them up and getting more powers. But that's another trope from that kind of genre, right? Like, I really need to rewatch Zombieland because I can't think of any of where they wanted to go. Yeah, like Tallahassee, right? Like, he's been out doing stuff for a long time, and like he's really effective at pretty much everything. So like those kind of characters show up eventually in the game, but like they're always kind of slanted in their own little ways. And absolutely my favorite part of the very first round of playtests, in like the second session, they had found this like zombie the zombie vaccine. And like in a move that just blew my mind as the GM, and I had no idea how to react to. One of my players is he's talking, and he's holding he's pantomiming holding basically a can in his hand, and like talking about the vaccine that he's got there. And then he just kind of keeps talking for a while, and this was on Roll20, so he's on camera. And then like at just one point randomly like pantomimes drinking what he's holding, and I'm like, hold on, did your character actually do that? Because I'm gonna need to stop you for a second there. And that just turned the whole campaign sideways, because I had already written up the player handouts that were also stuffed in the bag where they found it, but they hadn't read them yet. And like the whole thing was about how everybody that had been exposed to the vaccine had died, but not come back as a zombie. And they're like, well, I guess we kind of succeeded. There's actually going to be a section in the book where I'm like, here's an example of how you would hack the rules when your player does something wildly insane. And this is not hypothetical.
That's great. I love that.
But yeah, so his crazy choices in the playtest did pretty much everything from that ended up in the book. Like all of the advancements as you gradually become sort of a zombie, but kind of not. All of that, for people that end up going down that path, if they do, show up in the book, because I was like, you know what, it was too much fun not to include. So like, basically I want everybody to be able to have as much fun as we had with it, and it was a ton of fun to play test, I'll say that much.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds like it's a game that's designed to tell a story, but also just be a really fun, quick time.
Yeah, it definitely was. That's definitely what it is. And then another thing that I'm really excited to talk about was another play mode that we kind of it was an idea that I picked up from like one of the Legacy spin-offs. I think it was called Free. It's called Free from the Wheel, and they have a system in there for doing large-scale battles, and it's kind of weird and free form, and there's like, basically you end up writing stakes, like things you stake, like, my general is captured, my troops are decimated, those kinds of things, and you put them all in a hat, and you go back and forth between the two people fighting, and they draw things out of the hat. And like, if you draw one of your stakes, then that doesn't happen. But if you draw your opponent's stake, you describe how that thing comes to pass, like what bad thing happens to their how their general's captured, how their troops are decimated, how their supply lines are ransacked. And I was like, that's a really cool system. I like it. It has some ups. It's really is a different system. It's the thing I'm interested in exploring a lot in design. But it's also kind of boring for everybody at the table except these two people. I'm like, how could I add that to a game where everybody has that much fun? And so the idea that kind of came out of that was kind of a heist system, if you will. So the idea is that the characters all have a foreknowledge of where they're going, what the layout of where they're going is, what kind of dangers they can expect, where they might be, and they've prepared for all of this, and they have a plan already when they're walking in the door, and they know exactly what they're going to do. And the only things that go wrong go wrong because their intel's wrong, mostly. Like a classic heist movie kind of. And so for when we decided to play test this, they had been dealing with Eustace Jones, the basically Florida man. If every story about that, if every news story that starts out Florida man does something wildly insane, like fights an alligator with his bare fists, or robs a store with a boa constrictor, if all of those were the same person, and they were in a zombie apocalypse, that would be Eustace. The characters had interacted with him a bunch of times at this point, and the guy who was slowly turned into a sort of half zombie had fixed what Eustace kept referring to as a Geiger counter, because Eustace, he doesn't have a whole lot of book learnings. Yeah, so they had fixed this Geiger counter for him, and he had gotten in the habit of going around and testing out to see if anything was experiencing any radioactivities, if you will. And he had discovered that the nearby nuclear power plant was giving off an alarming amount of radiation. So they knew where they were going. He had also somehow come up with the plans for the power plant. And so they had the plan. They had the map of the place. They knew how to scram the reactor. They knew in general what it was going to be like inside. And so I had just found some plans for a 1950s era reactor in a college that was in the basement of a college, in their college physics department. Yeah. And I found that map, and I gave them that map, and I'm like, all right, well, how are you going to go in here and scram this reactor? Because here's what you're doing. So they were breaking into this nuclear power plant full of zombies and trying to shut it down. And so beforehand, what I had them do was describe the plan, and we wrote the plan out as a bulleted list. And then I'm like, okay, well, each of the bullets in the list is one of your objectives while you're in there. So, and then I had five chits more or less with stars on them, and I put them in the hat, and I'm like, all right, so these 5, when you draw those, you accomplish one of the tasks. And then it goes back in the pit in the pot. 4 of them involved or whatever, so I wrote on each. Then we had 4 chits that went in the hat, and they're like, each of these means that you either triggered the alarm and made everybody aware that you were here and doing stuff, and that's the first time one of them's drawn, or you get hurt. And in They Stirred, there's 4 levels of hurt. You're not hurt, you're cosmetically injured, you're impaired, really, really badly hurt, and then dead. So being hurt once is pretty bad. So those all went in the hat, and those, if you draw them, they also go back in. And then I'm like, all right, well, there's a couple more. There's a few layers of complexity to this. So here's a couple more that go in. And then if you guys want, and then you guys have to pick some more stakes, because you need to stake something for every objective. And then here's the things you can stake. Your character gets really badly hurt, takes 2 levels of damage, or you have to expend one of your surpluses, which is kind of as a crew you've accrued. I think they came into this one with a surplus of ammunition, just an enormous stockpile of ammunition. So well, we're gonna go in there ready to just actually, normally we're going to sneak around zombies. In this case, we're going to just go in guns blazing and stake our surplus of ammo on this operation. And then they had to stake also some favors that were owed to them, because that's another kind of currency in the game that plays pretty heavily into a lot of the story building kind of elements. So they had to stake some of the favors that were owed them. And then so like as they're going through, like they draw like, the first one is they drew the star, which is you accomplish a goal. So that person who drew the star was then like got to narrate how it happened. So I think the first one was that they snuck in through the window into the machine shop nearby. So so he's like, oh well, the window's already broken out, so we just kind of like check out to make sure there's no any like sharp edges at the bottom, and we kind of climb in, and we're in the machine shop. Then we drew the next thing, and I think they got like 3 or 4 objectives in, and we're starting to feel pretty good. And then like just an enormous string of bad luck as they kept drawing all of the consequences one after another, basically. Because I think they made it like all the way into like the room where you can kind of like look down into the pool, and where the fuel rods would have been, and they look down in there, and the edge of the pool is cracked and the water's drained most of the way out, which is the source of the radiation, but also really, really, really bad. So then things just started going really bad at that point, and they triggered the alarm, and zombies started coming out of the woodwork, and somebody I think somebody tripped and fell most of the way into the pool, like into the now empty pool, and they're like hanging out on the edge, and they had to drag him out. But like, this was great as the GM, because I drew, it was like one person draws, and then you go to the next person to your right, then you go to the next person to go right, and you go to the next person to the right. And like, this was a group where literally everyone playing has GM'd a significant amount of games of multiple systems. So maybe it wouldn't have been as much fun. I don't know if we weren't all seasoned GMs, but it was a blast because everybody was putting their own twist on how the story was going. And like, sometimes as the GM, you kind of feel bad that you're like being mean to the players when they have a string of bad rolls. Like, I really sometimes kind of feel bad for them, and want to help them out. And like, I wasn't the one I wasn't forcing any of these bad things on them. They were like willingly narrating how it went wrong, and it was a lot of fun. And then I described it to my wife, who was in a different round of playtesting, and she got super mad that her round of playtesting finished before we got to play that, or one of those.
That sounds really fun, though.
It's super fun. I'm actually going to be running 2 games of that at Gen Con Online. I think all the slots are still open, so check it out. But if you want to be doing that, but I'm definitely running 2 games of that, and it works surprisingly well on Roll20. Like, I thought it was going to be really hard, but you can make a custom deck and put cards of a deck in, and that's basically how I ended up doing it. As an aside, I actually did make a pull request against the Roll20 character sheet repo, and so. They stirred character sheets are available on Roll20 when you create a new game. It's so that worked out pretty well. And those also have been play tested, because like I got sick of I got sick of copying and pasting around all the CSS and HTML, because that gets messy eventually. So I just made the pull request, got it done, and that was really exciting because I felt pretty cool when I did that. I'm like, wow. I mean, I'm a professional programmer, but by trade, but like, this is a well-known repository. I'm not usually in this kind of fancy
circumstance. Yeah. So Dry River Gaming is a company that was made adjacent to They Stirred.
Yep.
I know that you've been working hard getting it all set up with They Stirred. What are you looking to do with Dry River Gaming down the line?
I have a couple. Basically, I compulsively design games when I'm bored. I have. My wife was asking me this the other day. She's like, "How many games do you have in development right now?" And like, first of all, I had to stop and think and count, which is always a bad sign. And I think the answer was like 10 or 15 like fully playable games that I've like done some amount of playtesting with some of them. So I have an enormous amount of stuff I could just that I want people playing, because many of them have been a lot of fun. But I think the next I've been thinking about this a lot, and the next thing that I really want to do is some kind of 5e compatible product. I finally got Persona 5 on like super cheap on my PS4 on a sale, and I've been playing a lot of it, and I'm like, I kind of like this setting. It's kind of weird and goofy, and it fits into like the kind of stories I like to tell because it's weird and goofy. And so like that's kind of what I'm working on, is some kind of 5e product in the kind of like very shonen, like like action movie for young boys kind of genre of anime, where regular high school students go on like some kind of end up in some kind of crazy alternate reality. That's kind of like the premise of this next thing that I'm kind of working on. Although, like I say, I have a large number of basically done products that I should that like just need like finishing touches, and like here's how like that stupid chapter at the beginning of every book that you role-playing book that you always skip, where it's like, here's what a role-playing game is in case you didn't know, which you obviously know because you bought this book, right?
Yeah, they're always there, so
it's always there, and like it feels so vestigial, right? Like it's such a well-established concept. I feel like even people that like aren't into the genre, into the culture, know what it is to some extent.
Yeah.
So I don't know, like I need to to put them into like a finished state, I would need to do that, and I would need to I cannot draw to save my life, so I would need to hire somebody to make like put together some artwork for it. And I've come to realize that actually publishing a physical book is not like super hard. I expected it to be much more difficult than it actually turned out to be. Because like I back a lot of random things on Kickstarters, and I'm always like messaging the creator. I'm like, I really like the quality of this book. What printer did you use? And then about 50% of the time they'll tell me. And then I found one that I like that makes really high quality books that are realistically pretty cheap. So I feel like I could set the price point where I really want to, which is like cheap enough that even if you're like I don't know, D&D books are like $50, right? Like I feel like that's like where most of the books fall into, and I feel like that's a really expensive book, right? Like,
well, we talked about Blades in the Dark earlier, and I think in Canada it's $30.
Right, like that's a much better price point, right? Like I mean, I remember being, like that 9-year-old nerdy kid, right, who like was saving up his allowance to buy a book, like to buy like whatever $50 worth of nonsense TSRs put together that month, right? Like I remember that, but like that was expensive, and that was also taking away from my my Games Workshop Space Orcs Army, like that needed funding too. Yeah. So like I really want to hit a price point that I feel is somewhat more democratic of like $25 for like a legal pad dimensioned kind of hardcover book that's like like 200, like around 100, between 100 and 200 pages. I feel like that's you can get a lot of value out of that thing, but like they're cheap to print. And I would be happy to I really want to put the game in the hands of like everybody. So like, I mean, $50 is a lot of money. Like I get it. I want it to be, and I want there to be easier, cheaper ways to play the game. So one of the things that I was really happy that I got spurred to do when I got contacted by Weave the Tale was to put together. They're like, do you have a quick start guide? And I was like, no, but I probably should. So it's like, oh, well, I should just like edit down the rules so that like I can fit it in like 5 or 6 pages, and print that out as a PDF. And then they were like, and then somebody else on the Kickstarter was like, hey, are you gonna have like a quick start campaign setting? And I was like, I hadn't planned on it, but like that's a great idea. And so I did that too. I'm like, so I put together like, because I mean, almost every role player nerd, I imagine, I love making characters, but I'm not necessarily the guy that's going to go play the character because I've been suckered into being the game master far too many times, and everybody knows I'll do it now. So, I make a lot of characters, but I don't play a lot of characters. So, like, making a quick start campaign guide was like, oh wow, this is actually really fun. I get to make up a bunch of characters, and then like kind of weave them together into like a kind of cohesive thing, and be like, I went out of my way to make it so that most of them were gender neutral. Like, do you want to play as Doc Jenkins and like never use a pronoun in the description of the character? Eustace Jones got transplanted into the Quick Start campaign because he was just too much fun to roleplay, and to write his description was a joy. I was thinking, well, I mean, I probably want to put this up on Drive-Thru RPG, and I was like, well, do I though? Because I kind of itch.io's been real popular lately, and they I feel like they're
I won't badmouth Drive-Thru RPG on air.
I'm not saying they're bad. I personally publish a lot of stuff there, but like I've been really impressed with the business model of itch.io recently. Because like I don't know if you've published stuff on there before, but they're like, you get to pick what your margin is on selling PDFs on here or whatever you're selling. And I actually went and set myself a lower, because of that, I actually went and set myself a lower margin than I would have on Drive-Thru, because I was like, wow, that was so cool of you guys to let me pick. But then I just threw all this through both of the quick start guides up there for like $1, because I'm like, you know what, why not? I don't care. I want people playing it, and I that's really what it is. And
yeah,
$1 is the amount I'll spend without thinking about it on a microtransaction in a stupid mobile game. So whatever. Yeah, and yeah, I love you, Drive-Thru RPG. Don't take any of my products down.
So we're actually starting to run out of time here. We've been going for 45 minutes now. So I got 2 more questions for you, a little bit shorter. What advice can you give to a designer who has no experience, but they're looking to build their own game?
So one of the things that I would highly recommend is once you have that first swag of the rules, don't be scared to run it as a game for your friends. It's really it is amazingly difficult to run that first game, and like just remember, it's good. First of all, they're your friend. They're probably already inclined to like whatever you do, and like they're probably excited just to be playing a game, right? Like, that's a thing. People get really pumped about playing role-playing games, and like the system doesn't have to be good. The story is what this, the experiences of playing the game with your friends is what it's all about, right? So do it. Like, write some real simple rules. Make some really simple character sheets. Play a game with your friends. That's my biggest piece of advice. And it also leads into my second piece of advice, which is which is also the same as the first piece, which is definitely don't wait till it's done to play test it. You design a better game if you like write down your ideas, some really basic ideas, and try them out and see where they go. I never would have added like half the really, really cool things. Like most of my favorite things in the book in They Stirred were things that we came up with during a play test just because something stupid happened, like we were talking about earlier. So try it out, like, before you think it's ready. It'll probably work well enough. It's in your head already, right? And then the other thing that I would say is, like, check out Kickstarter. It was not that bad. It was not that hard. But like, definitely drop a budget, because like, some things are going to cost more than you think, and like, research what it's going to cost. If you want to if you end up publishing it, like, research it, figure out what things cost. Some things are going to cost more than you think, and some of them are going to be less. So like think that through and have a plan. But like I think I was lucky. I don't know if I was lucky or if I did the smart things or a mixture of both. But I'm blown away by the success of the Kickstarter, and I'd encourage other people to like try writing your games, try getting them published. It's super fun. I'll back you for sure. Because I that's apparently all I do now is troll Kickstarter and back new projects.
Yeah, I'm bad for that too. All right, and the final question of the night is, where can people find out more about you, Dry River Gaming, and They Stirred?
So I've been posting regular updates on the Kickstarter. Eventually, the goal is to have so the book publisher I have, or printer rather, has a program where they publish books to Amazon. It will eventually make its way there once we're ready to actually go. So you should be able to find it there at some point. Probably not. My goal is to have all this printed and ready and done and everything by December. So that, you know, but that's because I sandbag dates. Really, I want this in people's hands in October so they can play some spooky games during Spooktober.
Oh yeah.
Right, because like it's always fun to run some spooky Halloween games right starting out in October. So that's really when I want this game in people's hands, and hopefully I will have it done by then. Also, you can go grab the quick start guide on itch right now. It's $1, so why not? You can also, let's see, also if you're in the Twin Cities area, I will be wearing a mask that looks like a gas mask and running games of They Stirred at 2DCon in like 2 weeks. And then there's a couple games on Gen Con Live also. So there's lots of places to find either, you know, the rules, and if you have the rules and you want to play it with your friends, but you know, we are having our own little zombie apocalypse, and you want to play it on Roll20, it works really well on Roll20. I've tried it out and it was great.
All right, so as always, audience, that's all going to be down in the description below. Matt, it was an absolute fabulous time having you here. I wrote all these questions and you answered them right as I was going to answer them. So I was like, I'm just going to keep going. And that was really interesting for me.
All right, well, I'm glad that worked out so well. I had a blast talking about it, and it was really fun being here. So thanks for having me.
All right, yeah, so thank you. Yes, thanks so much. And audience, thanks for listening. Matt and They Stirred are scheduled to launch very soon, so go check them out. Take care, everybody. Have a good night. Thank you again to Matt for coming onto the show this week. Hearing about how They Stirred came to be and where Dry River Gaming is heading has been quite a treat. I personally look forward to whatever comes next from them. You really should go take a look at this one. It's super cheap, and if you're even remotely a horror fan, it gives you a lot of space to tell different stories. And as always, thank you, listener. We are incredibly close to hitting 400 downloads for the show overall, which is kind of shocking to me, and I'm just absolutely stunned and so incredibly moved for all the support you've given me. Remember, if you like the show and want to help it grow, give us a review on Apple Podcasts or just tell a friend about it. Word of mouth is one of the best ways for Scheduled for Launch to grow. Next week, we are in for a real treat because I have Dan from Paleo Gaming coming on to talk about his game, Omega Horizon. It's a sci-fi cyberpunk fan's dream, so look forward to that. I hope to see you there. Take care.